I want to talk about the current situation of the world, and in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and in the light of the Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way things happen in history, and the way the history tends to repeat itself. In the light of these things, what is happening in the world today, maybe this will encourage some of you to listen to me and watch the series that I started on Quran and nuclear war. And of course, in the end, the victory is for Islam. There's no doubt about this. But right now, the whole of humanity is going to be facing catastrophic, unparalleled difficulties, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, politically, in every way imaginable, total chaos. Let me now share with you very quickly the scenario that we are in. And until you don't accept this scenario that I'm about to give you, you cannot read into the future. You cannot see the future. And our job as Muslims is not to give the future. A prophet comes to tell something about the future because that's what prophecy is about. But it is our job to know where we're standing in history. And history has to do with collective identity. And individual identity and psychology and healing of the self is connected to the collective. And there's a lot of healing in knowing where you're standing in history and what you need to do in times of uncertainty. And when you see what the Prophet said come true, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you know you're on haqq. And haqq, being on haqq and knowing you're on haqq, knowing that you're on the truth, that you have intrinsic truth, intrinsic value because of knowledge that you have, is a healing. Bad news should never make a Muslim sad. Bad news should motivate a Muslim, I need to do more. Now, what is happening in the world? Bismillah. Number one, understand this. As you know, from the very beginning of Trump's administration, he was talking about we're going to take over Canada and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Now he's talking about Greenland. What is the reality behind that? And that is that in order to deter Russia and China, the United States has decided that they're going to take complete control of the Western Hemisphere. So basically everything from South America to Greenland, they want it in their control. Why? Because China and Russia's best friends are in South America. As you know, Cuba used to be communist, and we know the relationship between Venezuela and Russia. And so this southern part, but there's another aspect, which is that America wants to be in a situation to offer the big businesses cheap labor, but instead of going to China, they should go to South America. Taking over Canada is not a big deal. Why? Because if the United States said we'll allow dual citizenship between Canada and the United States, most of the people in Canada are not Canadian. Most of them are immigrants, and they'll apply. And all that needs to be done is to make the economic situation in Canada worse, which is already happening. And then tell people, if you want, you can apply for jobs in America, and Canada would become essentially part of America. So by doing what they did in Venezuela was symbolic of reasserting the fact that we want complete control of South America, which is an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. And they want to cut off China and Russia from any alliances they can have in the Western Hemisphere, and that they would not be able to use the resources of the Western Hemisphere, and to cut off any potential customers that China is looking for new customers so that it can deal with its situation with the U.S. So the U.S. cut that off. And of course, when it comes to China, NATO, most of Europe is going to follow what the U.S. says. And there's reasons for this. Number one, Europe has no resources. As you know, before this whole Russian situation with Ukraine happened, Russia was supplying oil to Europe. Okay, so Europe has no resources of its own. And Europe is too divided to agree upon anything else other than the fact that we should follow the present winner, which is the U.S. And of course, not a lot of people, like the French president, are happy about this situation, because now Europe is being treated by the West, or by the U.S., like as if they're a foreign country in a sense. So the way Trump treats European leaders is no different than previous presidents were treating non-Western alliances. And the only alliance that matters to the U.S. is that of Israel. And there are many reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into. But what is important to understand is that the the Monroe Doctrine has been extended, amplified, and now they will begin to take political action to isolate Russia and China from the Western Hemisphere completely. So this was my first point. The second point is that the United States, as the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Awwalan halikan farisan." The first to be destroyed will be the Faris, which is Iran. Why? Because when you take control of Iran, you have control of the most important choke point of the world, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And who is in need of Strait of Hormuz and who is dependent upon Strait of Hormuz is China. China's 80% of the oil comes from, that China is getting 20% of its oil from Russia, and 80% of its oil is coming from Strait of Hormuz. So when the U.S. controls Iran, then the Israel and the U.S. perhaps by the time they control Iran, they will now target. They're going to be in a position to target three things. Number one, Pakistan for the nuclear weapons. Number two, the Strait of Hormuz for against China. And number three, they will be able to create chaos in Turkey, and that will lead to many political situations, which I'm not talking about right now, which are also indicated, by the way, by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In order to encourage you to watch my series on Quran and nuclear war, I want to mention a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is in the by Ibn Majah, rahmatullahi alayhi. He's recorded this hadith. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there will be a yellow wind, a black wind, and a yellow wind, a red wind, and a black. And in other narrations, the Prophet mentioned only the red wind followed by a black. Those of you who understand what will happen after a nuclear attack can probably relate to this, but I encourage you to watch my series on Quran and nuclear war. I've only done 2 series, inshallah I'll be doing 3, in which also I will be talking about the current situation perhaps in a little bit more detail, if Allah wills. And I know a lot of you have been asking me to do these videos, so let's see what Allah allows me to do. The other thing that is very important is the Russian and Ukraine war. And in the latest economic forum, which happened a day or two ago, Zelensky was like, why don't we do to Russia what we did to Venezuela? The US should just take the Russian oil that's, in the pipelines going towards Europe. They should just take all that. So what is this doing? This is escalating. So you have Pakistan and India that are just on the brink of escalation, really. And NATO, US against Russia on the brink of escalation. You have China that they're going to try to choke China using the Strait of Hormuz and cutting off its customer base. And this is the plan. And this is from the US perspective, from the perspective of hegemony, this is the only plan. This is the most important plan. So now, as you know, before the US was saying, no, we don't want to fight with Iran, but Israel was pushing the US, no, fight Iran, fight Iran. But now Iran and Israel have a common goal. Israel and the US have a common goal, which is that we both have a stake in taking over and toppling over and controlling Iran. Now I want to remind you the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Prophet said that Dajjal will come out of Asfahan. In another narration, the Prophet said ﷺ, Dajjal will come from Khorasan. So this is the same Khorasani area. Okay, so this is the current situation. The US wants to extend the Monroe Principle, wants complete dominance over the West, wants to cut off China and Russia, and it wants to take control over Iran. And of course, Sudan is part of this, because if you read the eschatology of the Christians, and if you look at Sudan in terms of as a country, it is full of resources. Okay, and the Christian and Jewish eschatology point to Sudan as a threat. And over here, I'll say that they're choking the Nile through Ethiopia with the dam in Ethiopia, and they're choking Egypt and Sudan. So that's also happening. Turkey is choking Iraq to choke the Kurds by controlling the Euphrates. So the water in Euphrates is going down. The water in the Nile is going down. And so all these things are happening. And the situation is such that the US is taking very desperate measures to keep its hegemony, to keep its power. And the US is not going to let go of first position without a fight. And so when they will control the Strait of Hormuz, meaning the US, when they take over Iran, which they will do, because the Prophet said so. And sometimes I think, why did Allah choose Iran to be the first point for this? And one of the answers that comes to my mind is those that curse the Sahaba, those that are happy with Allah, Allah has declared war against them first. Non-Muslims are non-Muslims, and non-Muslims are doing what non-Muslims are supposed to, and Allah knows best. But the US will try to choke China using the Strait of Hormuz. And when that happens, the whole BRICS thing, because now China and Russia, they're cut off. And so BRICS will be much harder to maintain, because the members of BRICS will be given a very clear, loud warning that you are not to move in this alternative direction. So it is a possibility that BRICS might not happen. But this is a longer discussion that I will have at another time. What is important for us as Muslims to know is that, number one, catastrophe can strike anytime. There's too many factors out there. And so we need to be at least doing the basics of Islam every single day. We need to pray our Fajr prayer, the men should try to pray in the Jama'ah, and doing our reading of Quran every single day, reading of our adhkar every single day, doing du'as of protection every single day, doing du'as for guidance in this time of fitn for ourselves. The biggest jihad in the modern, like this, on a daily basis, is the jihad for the kids, to maintain their Islam, to maintain their Iman. This is the biggest jihad of the moment, you can say. But knowing that this is the state that the world is going into, which is basically chaos, Muslims need to be strategic at this time more than ever. So please share my video with others, and I would like to also see intelligent comments by people who disagree with me and by people who agree with me. So this is the scenario that we're in, as far as I see, that the US is responding to, and Israel via the US is responding to Russia and China. Israel doesn't care if it's China on top or Russia on top or the US on top. Israel doesn't care. But the US cares, so US is taking these measures to take complete control of the Western Hemisphere, South America, North America, up to Greenland. And that message has been delivered by Trump. Clearly, people take him as a joke, but he's not joking. And he's going to try to prove he's not joking. And no one is going to reverse these policies. We live in a totally... Look, I don't have time right now to go into the depths of all of this. But maybe some of you remember, I used to talk about these same issues for as long as 2 hours sometimes. But I'll say this. Look, everything is changing under our feet. The rug is being pulled under our feet. I'll give you one example. The financial system is completely changing. Look at crypto. It came and changed everything. But people don't realize things are changing, and we think that things are all almost the same. They're not the same. They're completely different. There are completely different infrastructures in place that were never there. Even 3 years ago, they weren't there. So things are changing very quickly. And things are escalating very quickly. And so it is with this point that I hope I will end now, that what the Quran said will happen for sure. And you have to understand that when the people in power are animals, they don't care what their power will cost. And the rich don't mind if a few million people die, even a billion people die that are poor, because AI is going to replace the human workforce to a great degree. And so there are people who want a nuclear war. They want less population so that they can survive. This is, again, a longer conversation. The most important point I wanted to make were two: why Iran is strategically now important, based upon the Monroe Principle and the extension of the Monroe Principle in the Western Hemisphere, and how that is then now going to be established in the Western Hemisphere. And now the empire is going to act like an empire. Okay? The U.S. empire is going to act like a U.S. empire. And so I will end here. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.